Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure Podcast. I'm Kevin Gosztola, joined by Rania Khalek. Hey, Rania.
Hey, Kevin.
And we're pleased to have as our guest this week Briahna Joy Gray, co-host of the Bad Faith Podcast, as well as the former press secretary for Bernie Sanders. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you both today.
And we've wanted to have you on for a while, and now
what better time than now? All the drama.
I don't even know which drama you're referring to at this point, to be honest.
Well, it's been kind of good drama because you had the force the vote stuff, and then recently, like last week, it was all the Sam Seder stuff. So Kevin, what did you want to open with? I'm sorry, I just wanted the drama. Like you've been trending. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's one word for it.
And I think it doesn't have to be the entire show, but something I've been following with Force the Vote and you getting into it with Sam Seder and other people and what happened is I'd like to see if you could help us disentangle or sort out what we do in order to have these conversations over issues and political tactics without getting so hung up over personalities, because it seems like one of the things that is going to make it really, or has made it really difficult to engage with people about what's happening politically, is that everyone keeps going back to Jimmy Dore as the, reason why they were opposed to force the vote. And some people will say it, and then some people won't say it. But then when you engage them, you find out that what it amounts to is that they just don't like Jimmy Dore. So you can't have conversations with these people. It's not even constructive to debate the tactics of what was going on or the issues around it, because they're so clouded by their dislike for a certain individual. And I'm curious, since you've experienced it firsthand, what kind of lessons you're taking away around what we have to do in order to get past the idea that we're so fixated on certain individual personalities.
Well, it depends on whether or not you want to take in the specific instance the focus on Jimmy Dore in good faith. I think there are some folks who don't really even care about Jimmy Dore that much, but see it as a rhetorical opportunity to not have to engage in the substance of the conversation. Because as I, asked and pressed Sam Seder during our debate, I said, this was in many ways an idea that you brought to the foreground. I heard it from you first. And if you wanted the idea to exist separate and apart from Jimmy Dore, you simply could have made it your own. You have a platform as big or bigger than he does. You have a number of people that work under you that all shared your perspective. I'm sure they're allowed, obviously, to think independently, but in this instance, there was a real united front there. And if you had decided to make this idea your own, to build upon it, to grow it, to edit it in the ways that you would like, to seek different asks, more asks, to frame the pressure on the squad differently, you absolutely could have done so. And his answer to that was, I just didn't want to. Obviously that's not a direct quote. You should go back and listen to the debate. I don't mean to misrepresent him, obviously, but when I pressed him on why he didn't do that, he just was like, I don't want to. So how much do you want to credit the excuse that I just didn't like Jimmy Dore if there was absolutely no effort made to distance it from Jimmy Dore? And quite to the contrary, every opportunity is taken to say his name, to tie him to it, to do endless clips on one's own show about him specifically, instead of generating your own content about your own ideas.
I think that's a really good point that you're getting at, because it did seem to me like, well, initially it was a kind of war of egos. Like there is this kind of hatred and jealousy. Like Jimmy has this huge platform. There does seem to be a little like a jealousy and just personal dislike behind it. But then on top of that, it does seem to be a lot of trying to kind of run interference for Democrats. Like maybe these guys, these people, and I can't speak to anyone's actual intentions, but it seems like, they're always talking about Medicare for all in theory, but then when they had this opportunity to actually get behind something that could have pushed for it, it really did seem like they just didn't want to pressure Democrats. Like that seems to be where the problem lies, is they don't want to have to pressure Democrats.
Yeah, well, Sam, to his credit, admitted so almost explicitly within the first 10 minutes or so of the debate. He said that someone peripheral to these Congress people had reached out and asked him not to pursue this. I've had conversations with others. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, especially allies, but people who are wobbly on force the vote and who later came out for it said, a congresswoman in particular had spoken to them and said it wasn't a good idea. And she reached out to me and said, well, what do you think about this? And I sent her my article and she's like, oh, okay. And got back on board again. There was an emphasis by certain journalists on this in a way that seemed to be in very much bad faith, pretending as though the pay-go exemptions that were secured not because of any exertion of leverage, it seemed like that was something that had been worked on long before First the Vote really took root, pretending that those narrow pay-go exemptions for climate and COVID had anything to do with the long-term potential of Medicare for all as a policy that extends beyond just the immediate context of this pandemic. And David Dan weighed in response to Ryan Graham saying, I'm not sure what these pay-go exemptions have to do with anything. And so it is confusing. And unlike the people who flung a lot of barbs back and forth in the course of the Force the Vote debate, calling each other grifters and questioning each other's motives, since I can't prove anything, I don't think it's especially useful for me to make those kinds of accusations. But it does feel like there's something else motivating some of the pushback here. I'm not going to say all of it. There are people who have made more fact-based criticisms of the plan. But, when you watch the debate and you hear some of the illogic in the response to this idea, and to your point, Rania, when you see so many people who are like, yes, Medicare for all, it's the issue of our times. All these people are suffering. All these people are dying every year. And then there comes an opportunity when there's actual power to be leveraged and people don't want to do it. It starts to be suspicious. And for me, the final nail in the coffin was the admission during the debate that Sam didn't actually understand the very fundamental premise of the whole thing, and was peddling aggressively the frankly lie that the progressives did not have the power to oust Pelosi, or that if they did, it would risk Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House, which is patently false. And so that shows not only that he didn't even understand on a very basic level the plan that he was so aggressively trying to convince his million followers to reject, but also that he had failed to even engage in a superficial way with any of the discussion that had taken place up to that point, outside of, I guess, just watching Jimmy Dore clips so that he could breathlessly cover them on his own show. Because I didn't say anything in that debate that I didn't write in my article that was published on December 15th, and that I didn't say during the Force the Vote town hall, in which we heard heart-wrenching stories from people who have firsthand experienced the horrors of our for-profit healthcare system. And if he had cared enough to engage in the least, rather than taking a position motivated by who knows what, he wouldn't have been caught so off guard.
So maybe the fault lines existed and you just exposed them through your work with Force the Vote. But I thought that it was a good thing ultimately that you were inviting Sam to come on and have this very long discussion over Force the Vote, because it seems like there's a lot of raw feelings that still exist between people over it. And I do have to admit that I'm a little concerned, even though it's people who I may not always share politics with. I do tend to fear what's going to happen with this division if it isn't repaired. But again, I don't know how real it is. The way you're describing it, it seems fair that maybe people are being opportunistic and they don't really have as serious of a disagreement. It's extremely difficult to tell, but when you look at what Sam Seder did after having this conversation, after you tried to engage in a good faith discussion and figure out where the disagreements were and what was reasonable and unreasonable about the disagreement, and then you post the video and people are digging into it and maybe taking away lessons, and Sam feels the need to go on his own show and add in extra color and essentially say things that you were calling out as being false about how this conversation came to be. I think it's a huge issue for people who may want to have these kinds of discussions, to host these on their platforms, because it shows that there's like a liability that afterwards that person who acted like they were okay with talking with you are going to back away from it and then trash you later. So it's almost like, why even engage in those good faith discussions with other people?
Well, it certainly doesn't put me off, right? Like, I'm obviously disappointed by Sam's behavior. We spoke for 3 hours. Anything he had to say to me about my tone, if I was offensive to him, he could have said in the context of the show. If he felt like I misrepresented any facts, he had ample time and opportunity to push back to my face in the context of the show. And it feels as though he only felt the need to weigh in additionally after the public response to the debate seemed to militate in favor of my argument. And that's frustrating because I really respected and appreciated his willingness to come on and spend that much time with us. Um, I felt like it was a conversation that needed to happen and was a long time coming. And I never want a guest that comes on my show to feel like it was a trap or that they were treated unfairly, because obviously I want people to keep wanting to come back and engage with us. So much so that after the show, when we were cutting clips, as one does to make sure that people watch it, because most people don't want to, randomly tune into a 3-hour hunk of video. I intentionally avoided some moments that I think were actually very important in terms of clarifying the debate, but optically didn't make Sam look so great. I did clip the moment where he revealed he didn't understand how the speakership vote worked, because that is just so fundamental to this entire argument. But I intentionally left a lot of the other clips on the wayside until after Sam revealed himself, I think, to not have been the best sport in all of this, at which point I decided that there was no point in me exercising the restraint that I had exercised previously. So yeah, it was a disappointing episode. You know, I I expected more. I don't know really what more to say. I think everyone's behavior sort of speaks for itself.
And I think what's really important about it though is kind of like the overall tactical issue it shows when it comes to this big chunk of the progressive media. Um, that, and I guess the progressive left, that is there, like there's a split here over how to tactically move forward on these kinds of issues. And I guess I don't want to put Sam Seder like in charge of the wing that's kind of like for working, to prop up these Democrats. But that's kind of what their position is, right? It's like they don't want to pressure Democrats. And then there's another segment of people who do want to pressure Democrats and actually push for stuff. And I see that fracture taking place in this kind of like new People's Party that's springing up. But it also, I guess, the where I'm leading to here is to the issue of creating a party outside of the Democratic Party. It's creating a third party. And this moment does seem like that sort of moment where you have the momentum to do that. And I don't know if that means creating a party that can run candidates or just a party that can exist as like a movement outside of the Democrats to pressure them. But what I do know is that the Sam Seders of the progressive media are vehemently against that. Like for them, it's work inside the Democratic Party. There are no other options. Like just, keep doing the same thing.
So it seems obvious to me, and it's something that we said a lot in the context of the Bernie campaign, that this wasn't about Bernie. This is bigger than Bernie. This is about these ideas, right? And we all loved, embraced the squad, gave them money, amplified their message, door knocked for them, etc., because they represented those ideas. They said they were going to carry those ideas across the finish line for us. ASC very notably talked about how she would rather be a one-term congresswoman than kind of forgo her values. That's not a direct quote. You should go back and listen to the video. I'm sorry. Again, I don't mean to misrepresent anybody here. But she, herself lamented just last January how frustrating it was that we couldn't even get a floor vote on Medicare for all. This was the kind of fighting spirit that they were supposed to represent. And, Kyle Kulinski, who was a co-founder of the Justice Democrats, who found ASC and ran ASC as a candidate, was for force the vote and said that this is exactly the kind of action that they anticipated squad members taking, Justice Democrats rather, taking once they were in office. And he was disappointed that, she wasn't picking up that mantle. So the question of what to do now, I'll take that in two parts. One, yes, there is a break among leftists about the approach that we should take to politics. And oftentimes when any kind of a discussion of a break among the left happens, it's, oh my gosh, the left can't get anything done because it won't be unified. Well, there's as much responsibility on the defend the squad at all cost side to be unified as there is on the let's actually uphold our values and pressure politicians to work for the people side, right? And so I feel like it's always my side that's being told that we're responsible for the break and that we have to make peace and get along. But what if the problem on the left is that we're more concerned with some like superficial unity than actually exerting the kind of pressure that can get things done? I just interviewed Kshama Swant on our podcast for yesterday's episode, and she's very notably a socialist, the first socialist to be elected citywide in Seattle since, I believe, 1916. And not only did she win her seat, she got a $15 minimum wage. She actually has been able to do things as not just like a kind of run-of-the-mill DSA socialist, but as a socialist alternative, kind of hardcore kind of a person. And so that the idea that even within the left, we have to move to the most moderate centrist position among us to get things done also doesn't seem to bear out both in recent history or the longer term history of this country. Oh, and one other point is that we also talked to Richard Wolff on our program, I think last Thursday, Marxist economist, and he made this point as well about the importance of third parties, not because necessarily your goal is to get third party to win in a national election or even a local election, although he very much encouraged that and talked about his own efforts to run as a Green Party, I believe in New Haven. But here's the crucial point, and I think this is really important. The left loves to pivot away from any conversation about electoral leverage to, okay, but we need to be more organized, and the fundamental unit of our organization needs to be unions. And I understand and appreciate that point very much so. Unions are important. We should work to grow union density again. Not sure exactly how, because there's not a lot of follow-up that comes with those kinds of discussions. And there's obviously a lot of legal barriers, institutional barriers now to us doing so. Thank you, Republicans, and frankly, some Democrats. But in the interim, I think we can also have a conversation about other kinds of units in which we can organize to leverage or deliver votes in the same way that unions were able to leverage or deliver votes, and door knocking and organizational power and all the other kinds of things you do to get out the vote for elections that made them powerful, right? And one of those could be an alternative party. And Richard Wolff's point was, if you can get a group of people that represents 3 or 5 or 10% of the vote, that is willing to say, I'm not going to go along with the Democratic Party coalition unless X, Y, and Z, then that's a different kind of power in and of its own that doesn't rely on your ability to actually win the presidency or win a congressional seat, etc. And so you should be very wary and suspicious of people who every time a conversation about third parties comes up, they say, okay, but you're never going to win. That's a straw man. It has nothing to do with the argument. There is power and utility in outside organizing groups, whether it's a third party, Democratic Socialist Party, a DSA that was actually willing to do a vote withholding campaign, Black Lives Matter being willing perhaps to say, Black people, let's not vote unless P. Diddy has his Black I forget the name of it, but a group that he's trying to do the same thing. There's power in all of these efforts. And I'm very wary of leftists who I think intentionally won't recognize that power.
Yeah. And, he also made the point of European countries, which and other countries around the world that are also democracies, but have like way more parties than we do. And it makes sense. And then that forces the centrists to basically offer concessions in order to create their coalitions when they come to power. We don't have anything like that in the US, and we're not even allowed to talk about it.
Right.
And that's the space that I think that's why you're such like a, I think that's why you make these people really angry, because you're very, very articulate, but also super polite about it. And
that's not what I heard. I heard I was extremely angry.
Even the clip that was going around of you supposedly screaming, like, you were so nice. I don't know. I give you so much credit because I don't know how you held your cool, because I would have totally lost my shit. I get like a temper and I can't hold back. So that was actually really impressive, that you were able to stay like restrained the way you were. But I do think, and I think because, of your involvement with the Bernie campaign, people know you, they listen to you more than they would somebody like who was like some Green Party activist all their life. So I think that you actually do present this like threat in a way that makes the people that we're talking about very anxious, because it does seem like, I mean, since even before I went into journalism or media, these people were like the kinds of people I would watch and listen to. And it was the same thing like 10 years ago. Yeah. It was the same like kinds of conversations 10 years ago when it was in the same arguments, third parties get Republicans, elected. Third parties are spoilers. Third party this, it's all, you have to get behind the Democrats and unify. And it's like, how much longer can you make that argument when everybody's life just keeps getting worse? Yeah, nothing changing.
I sometimes I think you're right. I think of the combination of me having been given some imprimatur of credibility by the Bernie campaign. They may or may not be having regrets about that. The fact that I do have a kind of very traditional, elite, kind of corporate, frankly, background that enables me to talk in a certain way and liaise in certain roles and have a certain understanding of my enemy, frankly, because they're my classmates and friends, like real life, cohort. And my actual existence outside of kind of a political professional network where, I don't have personal political ambitions. I wasn't trying to get a job on the Hill. I'm not trying to go and work for the Joe Biden campaign. None of those were concerns for me. And it's a privilege that I don't have to, right? I have friends who don't want to, do that. Yeah. But, people need to work. It's a recession. Like, I don't mean to judge anybody either. But I do have a certain amount of freedom. Being able to be on a self-funded podcast gives me a certain amount of freedom. They told me at the end of the campaign, Bakari Sellers and Tiffany Cross and the whole MSNBC crowd, you'll never work in this town again. And there are a lot of people for whom that would be really devastating, financially, in terms of their ability to sustain themselves. And I'm lucky enough not to have to live in that world. So I do feel a certain responsibility as a consequence. And it's not like easy. I'm not saying that I, totally tossed off the brouhaha of earlier this week because, frankly, I very naively, I guess, still think that people are going to be good. The best people. And I do think my relative naivete in a lot of ways is also a strength. Part of this is that I haven't been, neck deep in, Marxist theory for 15 years since college or whatever. And I'm willing to ask certain questions that I think, push back against some of the presumptions that exist. I'm a very action-oriented person. So I don't really care how we get there. I just want to hear the plan. And what I'm noticing again and again is as people have these very big brain conversations, I'm like, okay, but what's the next step? I'm listening to you so you can tell me what to do next and I'll do it. If you tell me to organize, okay, what are we organizing right now? You're telling me to join the DSA and all of these organizations, which I am a member of the DSA, but these organizations didn't act when there was an actual opportunity to leverage power. So what else is there? What's the plan? And when we have people on the show, we talked to Bernie Sanders' healthcare outreach coordinator, and I said, okay, you don't like force the vote. Tell me what the alternative is. You're a DSA person, you're an NNU person. Help me understand. I'm willing to be told there's another way forward that isn't this. It's a better way. Just tell me what it is. And when the revelation is, and I'd say this with all due respect to him, I think he's making this argument in good faith. Okay, it's a 20-year horizon, and it involves doing Medicare for all state by state. We're going to get it in California. It's going to be Gavin Newsom's, baby, and then he's going to run for president and bring it nationally. I have some skepticism. If 15 years from now, that's where we are, I will aid in that effort. But today, in 2021, in the middle of a global health pandemic, before which 68,000 people died every year without health care, and during which 15 million people have just become uninsured because of our regressive employer-based healthcare system that nobody else in the world supports, I need us to be talking about some other kinds of things in the interim. So, that's what motivates me. I see, there's the Sam Cedar stuff that happens, and that's frustrating. But then there's all the comments and mentions I have, which say, I fill a toilet with blood every day, and I don't go to my doctor because I can't afford it. That's like a real comment under our like one of our most recent videos. There's, the woman who testified at the 2019 healthcare hearings. They didn't call it a Medicare for all hearing. They couldn't say the word Medicare for all because Richie Neal said no. But the healthcare hearings, she testified about how her daughter had cancer. She went through all of her savings. She herself had a dental issue that she put off because she couldn't afford it. She ended up having to get all of her teeth removed. She periodically, drools now when she talks or eats. She used to be, I believe it's a trumpet player or a saxophone player, and she loved it. She was a jazz musician, and she just can't do it anymore. And I'm supposed to sit here and be like, no, I'm going to ignore her because Sam Cedar said, I don't think this is a good idea, and didn't even bother to research what the idea was.
Jesus.
It's that's the place I'm in,
It's so out of touch.
And there's so much pain and suffering, I think, that never gets translated into action. That's like a really important point that you're making. And comparably, we've had this episode that has gripped the news media, particularly the financial news media, for this past week, involving people who are purchasing shares of GameStop and driving the price up. And it's fun to watch what seems to be a hedge fund versus hedge fund battle, or people engaging in market speculation versus other more experienced elite market speculators, and it exposes casino capitalism. But there's also a really darkness to it, where you go to Reddit message boards and you find these horrific messages from people who had maybe $100 to $200 to their name and are buying one or one half of a share. I saw somebody post that they were able to profit some money quickly, bank some money quickly, and then they were able to go to the grocery store and buy name brand food products for the first time in a while. And it just seems like none of this that is going on ever reaches the people who are having these conversations that we have. It doesn't seem to be a factor in what they are saying on a daily basis. And you can respond to that, but I wanted to also just say I'm very glad that you raised what's going on with Kshama Sawant, because of the fact that she is facing this recall election up in Seattle, and that it's essentially a right-wing kind of a recall election. And to me, I don't know if Rania is going to disagree with as much as we both follow what happens globally, but this seems like what we've done to other leftist leaders in Latin American countries before, in order to delegitimize them and make it seem like they're not democratic, that they do not deserve to hold their positions. And the effect is going to be to try to tire and wear down Kshama Sawant so that she ultimately folds. I mean, if they're successful, I imagine they could keep bringing her up for recall election constantly until she folds under their pressure.
Well, she believes that not just with respect to her and her own office, but this is going to be a blueprint used for leftists all across the country if successful. And, it might even be something that starts to get leveraged at people like AOC. I mean, the things that she's being accused of, the basis of the charges are things like, okay, she's been accused of letting Black Lives Matter protesters in City Hall during the course of the protests over the summer. I could very easily imagine an AOC or a Rashida Tlaib, being in a situation where they allowed access to Congress. AOC's first day of work 2 years ago was a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office. Now imagine it was during COVID and otherwise the Sunrise Group wouldn't have access and maybe she facilitated them getting in the building. It could be very easily the same thing. One of the charges is that she led a march to the Seattle mayor's house, and there's a law that says you're not supposed to reveal where the mayor lives. Okay, well, she says, Kshama says she was invited to speak somewhere. She showed up. She didn't lead any march anywhere, and it was in the proximity of the house, but wasn't at her house. Okay, now I can very easily imagine any number of demonstrations that any number of politicians could end up at when called by these progressive groups like Black Lives Matter to stand in solidarity, that could end up being near an elected representative's home. So you can see how this could be very, very broadly applied and how dangerous it is, and why I would love to see more solidarity from groups like Black Lives Matter and progressives in Congress for Kshama and what she's going through right now, especially since so much of what she's been accused of is in relation to her support of Black Lives Matter. You made a point before that.
I was talking about the GameStop episode.
Oh yeah,
and the pain and suffering.
We wanted to get your opinion about how these poor billionaires are just like really. I mean, it's just awful. Like my heart breaks. I feel like we should start a GoFundMe.
Well, there's something I will say this. When I was in law school, I think it was a radicalizing experience, not because law school is a super hippy dippy liberal place, but because when people are telling you honestly how the world works and you're supposed to take it at face value, and it's even as they're pitching it to you as like, yes, this is right and good, it seems like horrifically skewed and biased. That is its own kind of a radicalizing experience. And I had the benefit of having a actually leftist corporations professor. I wouldn't have taken corporations if not for his reputation. And he, in retrospect, was just full on radicalizing the whole room all the time. And one of the first things he said on the first day of class was, any other corporations class you come in and they tell you that the goal of corporate law is to protect shareholder value, and that is right and good. Can anyone in this room think of other constituencies that might need more protection than shareholders? And we're like, what? He's like, come on, just throw something out there. And people are like, kids, sure. The environment, sure. Animals, yes. All of the anything, literally anything requires more protection than shareholders, who are largely informed, largely lawyered up, more affluent members of the population. Like literally the least vulnerable people in America are shareholders, but our entire corporate legal structure is geared toward maximizing their profit and protecting them, right? So that is to say that there's something really fun about how much Americans are getting exposed to how corrupt our system is, and how it's all a big game of two-card Monte being played by the most affluent people in the country with our money. And that it's another one of these mask off moments that is enjoyable for that reason. But it also, to your point, Kevin, is deeply revealing of how bad off so many of us are. And I keep saying this, and I feel a little Pollyanna saying it, but it's just true. And I don't want to be like afraid, scared off of saying what I just think is like ethical and true just because it makes me seem like a school mom or something. But we talked during the campaign incessantly about how 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency, and how everyone was in crisis. And that was before the COVID crisis, right? We talked endlessly about this. And then Biden is in office, and it's like impolite to bring that up now or something.
Right.
And that to me is it's so deeply unethical. If we were trying to use the exigency of reality to push Bernie through, it can't just be that was a rhetorical device to get Bernie to win. Did we care about it or did we not care about it?
Right.
And what it feels like is suddenly we're not supposed to care about it anymore because, oh, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. F that. There's stuff we can do about it, but it's going to come at the expense of some people that maybe you care more about protecting than the guy who can't respond to a $400 emergency and is using his GameStop share to buy, name brand cereal for once or whatever.
I think that this also there's another fault line on the left that this sort of leads me to want to hear your perspective on, is the level of hatred and disdain, which is correct. It's good disdain for elites and Wall Street that we're kind of seeing everywhere right now.
Eat the rich.
It really demonstrates like there is a way to unify a significant chunk of the country against elites, and the left isn't big enough to tap into it, but also doesn't know how. But then there's also a portion of the left, and I'm really just talking about progressive media when I say the left, so I'm not really sure. That's a really big umbrella term, so I should specify that. Like I guess like our commentators. There's like a significant like faction of them that are just vehemently opposed to like trying to reach people on the right.
Oh,
and I don't mean like white supremacists on the right or like militia people. Like, I mean, those people are kind of too far gone. You can't reach those people, in my opinion, at least. But just like regular average people who are, kind of there's a hunger to understand like why our society seems so messed up.
Yeah.
And they end up gravitating towards right-wing narratives and media because that's who has like the biggest platforms. But there really is an opportunity there to reach those people if we try to. And there is this kind of like fight that I feel like is constantly going on where people are like, no, like it's kind of the basket of deplorables fight.
Yes.
Where like you just kind of label, half the country as too deplorable to even matter, which is interesting to me too. I'd love to get your perspective on that, but I just want to make a point to that, which it's funny to me that it's wrong to want to reach out to like working class and poor people who might not have all the right opinions. It's wrong to do that, but it's okay to make coalitions and ally with like neoliberal austerity hawks who love war in the Democratic Party. Like, why was,
100%. I find this dynamic really interesting because frequently what I encounter is that I, as a Black woman who has a pretty significant investment in, equality and being anti-racist, is being hollered at by a bunch of often white women, but white people in general, about how my politics is somehow providing cover for white supremacists, or we
saw you leading that Proud Boys march. We all saw it, Briahna.
There's all this weird posturing about how they care more about racism than the rest of us. And when you look historically, when you look at what's going on, I have no problem talking to even frankly virulent white supremacists. I don't think it's your best waste of time in terms of the bang for your buck and how to go to the most far right person in the world. But like as an anthropological matter, as a matter of trying to understand the narratives that we need to debunk, to me it's like there's obvious value in figuring out what's going on in these communities. I understand there's a lot of hostility around like the New York Times, for instance, writing all of those like Trump supporter pieces. But to me, the problem is that they don't also do pieces about non-voters, in particular, all of the non-voters of color, disproportionately of color, who are checked out of the Democratic Party, checked out of the two-party system because they feel like neither party has delivered for them for generations, which is accurate. So it's less the issue of we need to know more. We don't need to know more about Trump voters. It's the kind of Trump voters they chose to interview, which is irritating. And also the fact that the coverage was superficial and like, let's do a photo spread of like dyed blonde girls in like American flag bikinis or whatever, the kind of thing that you like to do, standing artfully in front of a trailer or what have you. And that they need to do more coverage of more kinds of people. There's a lot of different kind of niche diversity in the country that isn't getting covered. But knowing more about folks is a good thing. Understanding what's motivating voters is a good thing. And it really kills me that 4 years after 2016, they still haven't gotten the diagnosis. God bless him, he's a former colleague. I mean, no disrespect, but the Mehdi Hassans of the world are still running around just saying racism. It's only racism. If you say anything other than racism, it's a direct attack to my Muslim daughters. And it's like, I am also Black. Like, I also am the target of these things. And I like very much want everybody to be safe and happy. So can you please just take what I'm saying in good faith? And to me, the way to protect my Black family and my Muslim friends, is to understand better what's motivating these folks, because newsflash, racism isn't new. Nothing new happened. It was activated. And here's what I think is a really important point that I probably should just write about. I've mentioned it in articles, but I've never written an article just on this point. The reason there's so much crosstalk politically right now, and always, I think, is because people don't add to the conversation about what's motivating voters the question of political prioritization. So it's not enough to talk about, is Medicare for all popular? It's popular, right? But the fact is that people prioritized in the last election defeating Trump, and Joe Biden was perceived, rightly or wrongly, to be the best person to do that particular job. So you have people on the left now, people like Sam Seder, explicitly arguing that Medicare for all must not be that popular because Bernie didn't win. Whew! I mean, I'm old enough to remember that was a neoliberal rallying cry. Holy smokes, like that blows my mind. No, that's not the issue. The issue is that people believe that it's not a winning issue. And why might they think that's the case? People don't even understand how popular Medicare for all is. So they think, I might like it, but nobody else does. Because they never see it spoken about in the media in a positive way. They never hear the statistic that 88% of Democrats actually support this program. I personally have never seen that said on TV. I said it once on TV way years ago, back when I first started working for The Intercept. I was on, I think it was with Steve Kornacki. And at the time, the stat was that 70% of Democrats supported it and a slim majority of Republicans did, like 51% of Republicans. And I said it on this panel, and they threw up a statistic, which was not what I said, which showed that only like 50% of Americans supported it. And I didn't realize that till after the fact, right? I didn't see this. I didn't see what graphics they were throwing up. But like that's the closest, I have literally never seen just 88%. The Fox News poll was good. Fox News, the exit poll that showed that, 70% of people supported government-run healthcare. That's the only example I can think of. So people believe that it's not a winning issue. Everyone wants to be a team player. Everybody wants Biden to win. So everyone thinks this is not something that we should push for right now, which is why I think force the vote was so important. It was an opportunity while the stats are with us, because the stats aren't always going to be with us, and then we're going to have to work again to convince people. But while the polls are with us, to use those polls to push it farther into the mainstream and make people feel entitled to want universal health care like the rest of the world. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore.
No, but it's actually, it was what you mentioned, like it actually really disappointed me that because you guys actually like had tried to rally people in person for Force the Vote, and everyone, and like all these people were sneering like, oh, you didn't even get that many people to show up. And the disappointing thing about that is it was an opportunity for people like Bernie Sanders and AOC to actually tell people, come out and push this. Had they done that, like tens of thousands of people probably would have showed up.
Yeah, and the argument people say to that is, well, if it required AOC to do it, it wasn't a good plan anyway. Like what? The impeachment, like literally a week later, they rallied the kind of energy around impeachment that they could have done for Medicare for all. They were all tweeting out, here's a list of Congress people that you need to call. All of the stuff that we would have loved for Force the Vote. And it's like, well, you need to organize harder. Okay, well, they're not organizing for impeachment. They're just tweeting. So it's okay when they tweet, but, we are using what we have at our disposal. Look, organizing is important, and I'm happy to organize, and I continue to be involved in the work that's going on in the Force the Vote Slack. But simultaneously, they argue organizing is hard. You should respect organizers, but also if your organizing efforts don't immediately materialize results, then it's because you're a loser and not because organizing is hard. No, it is hard. And we're going to do that simultaneously, and we're working on it. But I'm a media person. I'm
Yeah.
talking about media. I'm talking about comms. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to make sure that the left is maximizing their comms potential at any and all time. And we should be working in tandem with organizers, but constantly treating it like there's some weird opposition. The new line is that somehow I'm anti-organizer and that I've been attacking organizers. No, asking why the DSA's own plan that they printed out, and I think it was their 2019 materials, they forced the vote. Literally, their own DSA plan to the letter wasn't good enough in 2020 when power was actually there to grab. When we did the work, we organized, we got the squad in office. There were enough people there to oust Nancy Pelosi. So now what? Like, now what? It's the skepticism comes in, and I don't mean to like criticize anybody's motives, but the skepticism creeps in when there's all of this rah, let's do it, until the power is actually in your hand, and then suddenly everybody has an excuse for why we shouldn't act on it.
So I'd like to add to where Rania was dragging the discussion or bringing the discussion to and talking about reaching out to people who, we're told that we shouldn't reach out to them because it's, to sum it up, racism, which is not really a good way of talking about it. But one thing that really deeply bothers me is when I look to conservative media or the right-wing media echo chamber, or I see who we maybe could more accurately refer to as sort of like libertarian leaning right-wing politicians who seem to take up issues that progressives or the left just entirely wants to ignore, doesn't really want to weigh in on. And so what happens is the left is effectively creating this vacuum that is then filled with this right-wing energy that is able to get people animated. And by not engaging in the discussion, I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. Like, we'll talk about what the monopolistic social media companies are doing in response to people, and how they're choosing to censor or moderate postings. And I think that it's important for us to be there and engaged in this and challenging things that are being done without transparency or a clear set of rules. I think now another example that we can expect the right wing to occupy, maybe what's been going on with these trading platforms that are open to what they term as retail investors. So there'll be like, working class and middle class people who simply want to buy like shares for $100 or $200 just because they're desperate to see how they could accumulate wealth. I mean, this is the equivalent of playing the lottery in your state and seeing if you can hit the jackpot or something like that. And so now there's demands to investigate. People were forced into selling their shares even as the GameStop continued to skyrocket. I'm just continuing on with this example of something that really concerns me, because we're seeing rumblings of, is Donald Trump or is he not going to start a Patriots Party, which could be a third party that would challenge the Republicans. And so, I'm someone who has followed Ralph Nader constantly in his political career and gravitated towards one thing that he's always spoken about rhetorically, which is if you're not making demands against these people, they constantly will be going to the right. And if you have a Patriots Party that's going to be the third party, it's just going to tug this entire Democratic Party even further to the right. And it's already has so much neoliberal rot within it. And it's almost hard to fathom that it could become more right wing, but there's always a place and a direction that we can go. So I suppose I'd like to get your response to this issue of us feeling like once Republicans and people on the right start to dig into this, that it somehow becomes their own issue and we ignore it and we don't really weigh in and have anything to say.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about the void. And I think we should talk more explicitly about how liberals are enabling right-wing extremism and fascism by creating that void. They are as responsible, almost, as the fascists themselves by having some understanding of history, seeing what's happening, and choosing to leave the void empty to be filled by the worst elements of our society, because they'd rather do that than actually challenge liberal authority, liberal power, the liberal wing of our oligarchy, right? And, you know, we have to be explicit about that. And that's back to Nader's point about being willing to push and make demands and speak truth to power. I'm actually interviewing him a little later today, so that's funny. There is a narrative that's going around right now that says if you are critical of our progressive elected officials, if you are critical of any of our progressive institutions at all, you are an enemy. You need to be rooted out. That you are attacking them, that you don't want them to succeed. I can't imagine a more kind of toxic narrative to be going around the left. That is a narrative that is guaranteed to turn any left institution that has the potential to do a great deal of good into a Democratic Party light.
And then that's when you wonder about the agenda, right? Behind a narrative like that, because that's the point.
That's the point.
That's what some people want to do, is they want to drag that left energy right back into the Democratic Party. And it's been working, by the way, for the last 3 decades.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little, the thing is, there have been kind of waves of this, waves of like realization and mask offing this since Bernie dropped out. And it's like, okay, Bernie drops out, it's sad. All right. And then, you realize how many people are willing to start just saying, vote blue no matter who. And like, okay, that's frustrating. Could we like take a beat to ask for a couple of things? No, just write in. All right. Okay. And then Biden wins, and it's immediately backtracking on all these promises. And it's no, give him time to lie to us more before we start holding him accountable for things. And now seeing how many people on the left, who I genuinely and sincerely followed and watched and admired for years, be willing to be so antagonistic to the ideas that I thought united us. And frankly, antagonistic to me personally. It's just very surprising.
The shit you get. Oh my God.
I'm really people who I really truly thought were my friends, and now I just had to mute because they just say weird things about me all day. I feel like they're like privately saying to me, "Oh, Briahna, I have this problem. We're having some conversation behind the scenes that is like coming out like no, they're just randomly decided." It's like frankly very hurtful, but oh well, there's nothing I can really do about it. So, it's wild. And so I would say to folks who listen to your show and leftists who are confused, like I want to assure you, like I don't hate AOC. I rooted for her and was enthusiastic about her along with the rest. I interviewed her and found her to be charming and has so much potential power to be helpful to the left. And I root for her, and I hope that that is the case. But I also am savvy enough to understand that that's not going to be the case if we aren't applying more pressure than the pressure that is being applied on her by the Democratic Party establishment.
Right.
And that she needs us to apply pressure to have any kind of strength in the establishment. On the inside, her power is never going to come from playing nice and negotiating with Nancy Pelosi, because people don't get things in in party politics because they were nice to you at the cocktail party or not. They give you things because you have power and leverage, and they need something back from you. And so what we need is for the squad members to think, to understand how much authority and power and leverage they have by using us on the outside, the people's power, the power of public opinion. That's what they have. They have the power to get us in the streets and to make life very frustrating and confusing for the Nancy Pelosi's of the world. But if they start to believe that they have more power in just like begging for committee positions from Nancy Pelosi, then they're going to care more about what Nancy Pelosi can give them than what we can give them. So because I want AOC in the squad, I don't mean to overly focus it on her. She just became the focus of Force the Vote because she inserted herself in that conversation with Justin Jackson. But, the squad generally, and all progressives, their success depends on our existence in the same way that Martin Luther King Jr. acknowledged the influence of the more radical parts of the Black liberation movement, Malcolm X, etc. The existence of them offering a different kind of approach to Black equality made it so that white liberals were more willing to compromise with Martin Luther King, because the attack dogs were in the wings. The real ones are in the wings. And it should not be that I, sitting here, frankly, a normie who should be a lib in any other country with my stupid effing Harvard degree sitting next to me, is the radical left wing of the Democratic Party. Like, this is not it. I would like to be a liberal normie again. So please, somebody needs to be doing more. Like, there needs to be more outside pressure than exists right now.
No,
right. I think. Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
Well, I just think you're making some really good points here because I have lost all my light. I think you're making a really good point here because it's got to be a two-way street. If we're supposed to show solidarity with our progressives or our democratic socialists that we elect to Congress, like AOC, especially if there's some kind of threats on her life. She's been claiming she was almost murdered at the Capitol during the raid. If we're supposed to show solidarity, then I think there's a two-way street where you also should be able to pressure that person into taking action. It is almost kind of like an inverted thing, but if you do actually care about the person, then you have to be willing to hold them accountable and to say that, like, we're going to hold you to the things that you have promised and pledged, and to have your back, because we know it's going to be difficult for you to do this against the Democratic Party establishment. I mean, there was never a guarantee that you were going to be able to beat Joe Crowley. You went up against the establishment and you triumphed. So we know that people are being blacklisted because they were associated or aligned with your campaign. They don't want other firms to challenge Democratic Party power structures the way that you did. But I think, as we wind down our conversation, I want to focus in on something I'm really glad that you're doing, which is it's only a few months after Election Day, a presidential election, and you're still trying to have a conversation about third parties and how we can further democratize and open up our electoral politics to more voices and choices. Because, and I sound like Ralph Nader, I'm using rhetoric that I remember from 2008, but I think this is good because oftentimes we wait to have these conversations until we're in the heat of an election and it's impossible to open people's minds and to talk about these issues, and you just can't have this conversation. And I want to pull out something I heard. You had a panel with some people about this, and I remember it was Bhaskar Sankara who was talking about how there's fusion voting in New York with the Working Families Party, and I think he was even saying that he's for it, but he would like it away from the swing states, I think was essentially what his argument was. And I do believe that that's another issue that we're going to have to get over with, is that there are lefties who are open to third parties, but they believe in this very safe strategy in which the Democrats are perfectly fine with, because we've come up with ways that they do not have their power threatened at all, and they're still able to allow people to vote for third parties. Now, on one hand, what that means is that those quote unquote third parties, like the Working Families Party, or there's like I think there's like a farmers labor party up in Minnesota, those are able to be successful and win elections, but that's because power is allowing them to win elections, and they're doing this fusion with the Democratic Party that they're completely comfortable with, because they feel that you'll still answer to what they ask you to do. So I just think it's important what you're doing here, this conversation. It's an important thing to keep going outside of the standard humdrum and the very irritating developments that we're going to see from the Biden administration, where they fail to respond to people's needs.
Yeah, look, I think about how reviled Jill Stein was, and how reviled I became by proxy for having voted for her in 2016.
In New York, of all places.
In New York. There was some kind of like map app thing that existed back then where you could see how many people voted for whom in your district. And there were like literally 7 of us. And I lived in the West Village. Like, you know what I mean? That's supposed to be like a liberal, historic and queer part of, like, no, it's like literally 7 of us voted for
Who ruined the whole election. You guys, 7 people.
It
ruined the entire election.
You and Susan Sarandon.
Me and Susan might have been one of the 7. She always posts pictures from her window, like, "Good morning, New York." And I'm like, "Oh, I think you live downtown." But the reason is, I think, and maybe this is cynical and conspiratorial, is because I think the establishment knows very well the kind of power that third parties represent. Jill Stein didn't win as many votes as what's his name, the libertarian Gary Johnson, by a mile. He got like 4% of the vote, basically. Like, he did a pretty good job, frankly. But there's a world where Jill Stein, some other third party person, says, "Here's my new strategy. If Donald Trump won Michigan and Pennsylvania, some of these other states by like 10 to 20,000 votes, if the margins are that thin, yeah, sure, I can't win an election. I'm just the Green Party candidate. I can barely get on the ballot in all 50 states. What I can do is make sure I'm on the ballot in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Arizona." And I'm going to go there and I'm going to just try to get 20,000 Democratic registered voters who definitely voted in the last election. These are guaranteed voters. They know where their polling place is. They know how to vote. And I'm gonna rally. I'm gonna organize them. I'm gonna talk to them. I'm gonna figure out what their prioritized issues are. I'm gonna work on making sure our priorities are good. Like, and we're gonna say, like Ralph Nader did in 2000, here's a list of demands. Here's a list of 20 demands. Concede to 3 of them, and I'll drop out of the race.
Yeah.
And if they don't, and here's the trick. They are going to vilify whoever does this, right? But if you want to win in the court of public opinion, it has to be done far enough in advance so that it's made very, very clear that the onus is on the Democratic Party for not doing the thing, not on the third party for being the spoiler. That's the crucial aspect. And that's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to win that rhetorical battle, but I think it can be done. You just have to be very, very clear at every media opportunity. What we are asking for is what a majority of Democratic Party voters want, and in fact, what a majority of Americans want. 3/4 of Americans want a wealth tax. 88% of Democrats and half of Republicans want Medicare for all, and on and on and on down the line. $15 minimum wage, student debt cancellation, medical debt cancellation. We all know the things that are enormously popular. And let the establishment defend why they would rather lose to whatever fascist is currently running for office on the Republican ticket, then simply deliver for Americans enormously popular social programs that, of course, we can afford in the richest country in the world. Let's have that conversation. And we might lose, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, and which will excite and galvanize millions of stay-at-home, non-voting Americans who have never seen in their lifetimes the Democratic Party fight for them at all. And if the Democrats want to gamble and not do anything and risk losing the election, well, that will be an important mask-off moment, and that will contribute potentially to the building of third parties in a more legitimate way, in a way that could actually enable them to win down the line.
I mean, you got to do it. I'm behind you. You convinced me. You're like rallying me and Kevin over here. But no, seriously, that's it.
I love this. I
think you just gave us the answer of what needs to happen. That needs to happen.
I wrote this in an article called something litmus test. I'm sorry, I can never remember the titles of these things because I don't write them. But in Current Affairs back in like June or July. The importance of litmus test, something like that, in Current Affairs magazine. And it laid this out. And I was very timid back then because I was like, oh, people are going to come for me, even though it was months ahead of the election. But over time, having conversations with people, having, off the record conversations with some Black Lives Matter people saying, hey, like, just out of curiosity, why didn't you tie any of the asks to voting for Biden? Like, you guys are asking for great things. You're in the streets. You've got the largest protest movement in American history. These are Biden voters. These are like all Black people. Like, have you ever thought of saying, okay, we're going to tell these millions of people not to vote for you unless you actually stop saying, give the police more money at the very least? But no, it's not something that people are willing to do because they're more afraid of being vilified for withholding their vote than actually fighting for the thing that we're all being told is like so important and so exigent. Well, then act like it.
Yeah.
Well, here's if someone yells at you and says, oh, you spoiled. Well, who cares? This is your job. You're an activist. You're literally an activist.
It's also like you got to recognize how you use your power. And what you're explaining is how you use your power. And that's something that like people just don't. And it's also a fear, I think, too. I think it's a fear of like being accused of getting the fascist elected. Like there is a deep-seated fear of that since Ralph Nader, because Ralph Nader, after the fact, even though it's not true, was accused, like till now, people still think that George W. Bush won because of Ralph Nader.
Yeah,
He gets blamed for the Iraq War. They say,
they're Democrats. Yeah, as if also that assumes Democrats wouldn't have gone to war with Iraq,
right?
Which I don't think that's actually clear, and we'll really never know. But there's an argument to be made that they might have. But regardless, it's not true. That's not why George Bush won.
More registered Democrats. This is the stat that I always love. More registered Democrats voted for George Bush in Florida than anybody voted for Ralph Nader. The margin,
Well, also like it's like let's talk about also the way that we disenfranchise voters. Florida had so many disenfranchised voters that had served prison time. Had even a fraction of them been allowed to vote, they would have likely voted Democrat, and you would have had a win. There's also the Supreme Court that literally intervened to take an election away.
Rania, what if the Boston Marathon bomber gets to vote?
He should get to vote. It's crazy that we even have that conversation in our country. No other country even does that to people.
Like, Bernie Sanders was the only candidate. Sorry to still be having 2020 brain, but Bernie Sanders, as everyone knows, is the only candidate who supported universal enfranchisement. As they have in Vermont, the only candidate in the race, and it became a litmus test for all the other candidates to attack him over this idea that all these social justice people, even people who are kind of
you're gonna let the Unabomber vote. Like
it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre.
It's just because it also just speaks to the fact that in America we've normalized taking someone's voting rights away as a form of punishment, which really does not happen in any other country. In other countries, people vote from jail.
Yeah, my grandfather, passed away believing that he couldn't vote. So Ohio doesn't have felon disenfranchisement laws, but I remember I was covering it. There was a story where some Ohio Republican was putting up all these billboards that insinuated that you couldn't vote if you had a felony record. And it wasn't true, but it was, affecting people's perception. And I remember in the course of the story, I was like, oh, I didn't realize you actually can vote in Ohio. And because I had been told my whole life, oh, yeah, like Papa can't vote. And he thought he couldn't vote. And it wasn't until it was like just after he had passed away that I was doing this story when I realized, oh, he's the person this billboard worked on. So even in states where they don't have these restrictions,
wow.
He was a deeply political person. You know what I mean? He was like, he cared. He was deeply invested in politics. And so like this country sucks, man. And somehow in the course of the last election, sorry, don't cut that. I'm going to run for office.
That's going to be the clip we put up is just you saying this country sucks. We're going to be like, she hates America.
This country does not treat the people who live here the way they deserve.
Right.
The country's leadership underserves the people who live here who deserve a lot better. And, you can say you're fighting for that to change. But begging for things is not the same thing as fighting and making demands. And that distinction is the kind of distinction on the left that I don't think we should paper over in the interest of like just togetherness, some squishy togetherness.
I'll also just say historical. I mean, we have a history in this country of vibrant third-party socialist and communist movements that played a huge role in organizing strikes and protests that led to the sorts of welfare programs that we want more of. And to pretend that that's not how it happened. It's not like we unified. That's what happened after the Great Depression. The Democrat Party just unified. That's not how it happened. And we shouldn't pretend. And we shouldn't pretend that's how. And I think some people just don't know. That's another thing too. People
or there's this thing that happens where people take a little bit of historical. People will just cherry pick. They'll pretend, because there's a lot of authority and weight that can come with leveraging historical examples, but they'll just use them incompletely to press the point. So it's incumbent on you to know better and to learn more. And to get through some of the books on the shelves behind me, and it's exhausting. But I'm very grateful to people like you and Kevin who have these shows, which I've listened to for a long time, and who, run through these facts. And it's been enormously edifying to me over the course of my relatively short journey on the left. So I want to thank you both, and thank you for inviting me here today.
Well, that feeling is totally mutual. We love the content that you're putting out, and the interviews you guys are doing are just, and the work you're doing and the platform you're giving it is so important. So we thank you for that.
And if
And
I
on
could
that
work
note,
in, well, if I could work in one more thing about you before we close, I'm really glad that you said during the Force the Vote time that we all have our lanes. We all have different things that we can be doing, and I think we're all going to come to what we're doing in our work with different ideas, and we're going to have an approach that is different. But we really shouldn't spend so much time trying to throw people off of their style, if it's just style. And we should accept that everyone has, I think I am naive like you most of the time. I'd like to believe that many of the people I'm following who I disagree with how they handle certain issues are actually working towards the same goals and objectives that I have in my life and in my politics. I think that's really important for you to lay out that you're going to do it your way. Rania's going to do it her way. I'm going to do it my way. But I think in the end, because we're all out there part of this struggle, it's good that people are able to be exposed to all of this. So, and then just to say on a very fun note, and I agreed to work this into our show for my wife. She saw you, and you didn't know you were doing this, but you were actually during your show, you were modeling a sweater. You were wearing a Starfleet Command sweater on Katie Halper's show one night that I was watching a stream, and she decided to hop online and purchase it for herself. So I just wanted you to know that this is something you're doing.
Icon.
I don't know if you know this, that you're influencing people's clothing decisions now, but this actually happened.
I love it. Well, I'm gonna have to start getting kickbacks from this sweater company.
You'll have to go figure out if you can post a link on Bad Faith or something and
yeah. I love that sweater. It's really funny. I bought one for my brother as well. The company definitely sells. It's like one of those giant sweater companies that sells like all the kinds of sweaters, including the kinds of sweaters that we wish weren't being purchased. But like they had the best, most softest, most comfortable Starfleet sweaters everywhere. So I hope she's enjoying it. I really love mine.
No, I want one.
They're so good. They're so cute.
All right. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll be back next week with another episode.